emerging worlds of TV and programmatic advertising with our host of the conversation. It's Paul Gubbins from Tubi, who's going to introduce the rest of his guests.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Paul. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Well, firstly, thank you for joining us on a very, very hot afternoon. Before we get into the weeds of the converging worlds of linear television and data-driven television, I'd like to welcome the panelists. And before we kick off, if you can just briefly introduce yourselves. Kirsty, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kirsty. I'm a senior retail media manager working at Waitrose and Partners.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim, Publicis Media and managing partner on PMX Lift.
And I'm Jerry. I'm head of international media at Restaurant Brands International, which is Burger King, Popeyes, and some others.
Excellent, thank you very much. Kirsty, so we'll start with you. With the rise of retail media networks, we've heard a lot today about the value of that type of data, how it can empower retailers. But what does it mean for the CTV activity that John Lewis and Waitrose might be thinking about running? Is there a kind of connective tissue that's being leveraged at the moment, your side of the fence?
Yeah, so essentially what we are doing in our work is we are working with our ad tech provider Epsilon to leverage our first-party retailer loyalty data, really for the first time, together with the deterministic data provided within Epsilon's Core ID technology. And essentially what that will enable us to do through programmatic advertising, through channels like CTV, is essentially enable us to reach audiences at scale, but still in a highly precise, high-target, high-value way. And essentially, you know, we've already been working with Epsilon for a few years now on our on-site proposition to deliver relevant and tailored ad content through sponsored ads there. But off-site has kind of always been something we struggled with. And I think now, through this kind of combination of our first-party loyalty data together with the data that Epsilon provides, essentially what that will enable us to achieve is extremely high match rates for our audiences. I think kind of when you think about that for brands and why that's so important is that it minimizes ad wastage. We're not kind of serving ad impressions to audiences, for example, who don't wear makeup and it's an ad for a lipstick or an ad for a burger to a vegetarian, for example. Yeah. And equally for customers, they're receiving relevant, personalized and tailored content as well, which really helps kind of strengthen loyalty. And actually, another thing as well, I had a really compelling stat that was presented to us last week from Google, which is that 70% of consumers would purchase a brand that they'd never heard of before. And actually, that's something that we can achieve through this partnership, is to reach incremental audiences, potentially, you know, potential customers who don't even shop that brand and maybe don't even shop it in Waitrose and John Lewis, but that's actually something that we can now reach with this kind of audience targeting. If you want to reach a high-value foodie sort of audience, for example, for a premium wine supplier's advert that maybe doesn't already shop within Waitrose and John Lewis, that's something that's absolutely possible through this kind of partnership now. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And Tim, you work at one of the largest advertising agency groups in the world. When Kirsty talks about some of this really sophisticated data activation from a brand's perspective, how do you and your teams think about joining the dots when it comes to advertising on streaming environments? You know, the growing number of AVOD and FAST services that audiences are now leaning into. Is it difficult considering there's an abundance of signals like there is in desktop and other environments?
Yeah, it might be like an obvious place to start, but I guess fragmentation has been an ongoing process in our industry. You know, when I started out, it was you know, going from 4 or 5 channels to multi-channel, mainly driven by satellite, and what you saw was media owners, you know, trying to spin off their brands into, you know, new brands, and subsequently, you know, agencies and brands themselves thinking about how they can kind of recapture that audience, which is fragmented. Obviously, what distinguishes it today, I think, is the pace that fragmentation is happening at and the scale. So what we've done at Publicis is really focus on building a connected identity ecosystem of inventory. So we have around about 40 million Publicis IDs in the UK, appended thousands of attributes. So it's really a, you know, full-blown connected TV addressable platform. Yeah. In terms of like fragmentation of that audience and those IDs, what we've really focused on is a capability that we will build the seed audience using those 40 million IDs, and then we will always match those IDs into our partner suppliers. So part of our supply comes through DSP, so that's all in Bitstream, and nice consolidated programmatic approach. Other partners aren't, so we'll use data clean rooms to match those IDs in. So that consistency of audience across multiple supply partners is really a core kind of capability for us to manage frequency and understand the deduplication of reach. Of course, with CTV, everything, key signal is IP.
Yep.
So you don't have kind of issues with third-party data, for example. And I guess on third-party data, it's really the risks are really how dependent you are on that third-party data, either for targeting. And we have 9 identifiers that underpin our IDs. Only one of those relates to third-party data or cookies, for example, so there's a really low risk for us. But if you're targeting purely on kind of third-party data, there's a bit of a risk. So really, we really focus on building out this connected identity ecosystem.
Yeah, okay. And the types of signals that Tim was just talking about there, Jerry, from a brand's point of view, obviously with big brands such as Burger King, you spend a lot trying to communicate with a whole different array of audiences. How do you think about measuring the effectiveness of that spend in these new streaming environments? Is it easier than it used to be, or is it becoming more fragmented?
I think fragmentation of media measurement is a challenge. I think we're very interested in some of the industry initiatives, like at WFA level, there's a thing called Halo or Origin in the UK, which is really trying to piece together more of the different channels and the different measurement into a kind of more of a, certainly from a reach perspective, a holistic view of that. I think CTV brings like certain new measurement capabilities and KPIs and numbers and some more granularity that we don't get on traditional TV. But at the same time, we try and think about it quite sometimes it's controversial to say like a techie advanced console, but we love TV.
Yeah.
And one of the things we most love about CTV is that it's TV. And that it's just, consumers are changing how they watch TV, and so perhaps they're still watching lots of traditional TV, but lots of them are watching Tubi. I can never work out how to say it. Or other streaming services, etc. And so CTV for us starts as just being, and there are obviously other things that come from the data and the targeting that we could talk about, but it starts from that kind of, well, we want to reach a different audience, and we actually think there's an audience there that is incremental and doesn't heavily overlap a lot of the time. But that's tricky to measure. But agencies have planning tools and things that can help us, and hopefully over time we get to better true measurement of that.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, it's really helpful. And Kirsty, from your point of view, things like loyalty data, how much is that being leveraged? Is that something that is now being used from your side of the fence when it comes to connecting the dots and looking holistically across all the different types of TV services that the audiences are watching? Is that easy to use via agency relationships and platforms within the holdcos?
Yeah, I think so. I think, historically, we've really struggled with leveraging our first-party data, to be honest, as part of our sort of programmatic off-site campaigns from a Waitrose and John Lewis perspective. So really, for the first time, this will be something that is very easily achieved through that sort of ad tech partnership that we have with Epsilon. And I think, particularly where we see CTV advertising playing is as a very complementary strategy to, the sort of more traditional channels such as linear TV that our brands have heavily invested in with us in the past. I think linear TV will always have a really important role to play in terms of driving brand equity and delivering that storytelling mechanic, but it's, there's minimal targeting. CTV advertising, through leveraging our loyalty data now, it will be possible to then serve much more relevant, tailored, product-focused ads that actually help to drive that sort of mid and lower funnel, more conversion-driving objective for our brands. And I think particularly in the case of, both John Lewis and Waitrose, but particularly for John Lewis, what's so important about this is that actually some of those more like retail sort of marketing-led campaigns that we run through those linear channels like TV are a really important part of our retail media strategy. And historically, we've been fortunate that brands have wanted to participate in those kind of ads with us. But like I said, we haven't really been able to offer much in the way of sort of measurement, the audience targeting side of things. And now a beauty supplier, let's say, who participates in that kind of ad, like the John Lewis Christmas ad, for example, in December, can then follow that up with a more targeted strategy to overlay that through channels like CTV to deliver ad content, not just to audience segments who may have already seen that TV ad, but actually to drive incremental reach to additional audiences, particularly younger demographics that may not necessarily even be sort of the core demographic for Waitrose and John Lewis. And I think that's what's so important about this partnership, is it's just going to kind of enable us to drive that incremental reach as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. And Tim, talking about, obviously the signals make all of this possible, right? All of the clever joining up of data and manage holistic kind of reach and frequency. How does the agency think about targeting in CTV. It's device ID, it's household IP. It's not third-party cookie kind of dependent like desktop and mobile. Is that kind of correct? Is that how it works today?
Yeah, I think in terms of working with brands or data partners like John Lewis, data clean rooms, we use them throughout PMX Lift, I think, across the product. So before we get to integrating with a brand, we're using data clean rooms for matching our identity into our partner universes, and also as a way to receive measurement data back in a safe, secure way, whereby we can do that dedupes, reach and frequency across our ecosystem. Within Lift itself, there's kind of two key ways that brands can bring their first-party data. So Kirsty did a good job of explaining how John Lewis is going to work with Epsilon. And that approach, so we would use, it's kind of a clean room, but it's an Epsilon owned data clean room, which we call Agility. But really that requires the brand to really have a full data integration with Epsilon, and then that affords all of the capabilities that Kirsty described. CTV being one channel where that data can be activated.
Yeah. Okay.
The other way that we're looking to develop is almost like a light version. So there may be brands that aren't comfortable with sharing their data directly with Epsilon, for example. So we'd look at connecting that brand with Epsilon, with the universe of our IDs via a clean room, and being able to do all the clever activation and attribution stuff from there.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for sharing that. It's really appreciated. And Jerry, I know you've been quite vocal in the past about media quality and trying to figure out the true value of different inventory sources for brands and advertisers. From your side of the fence, do you look at different types of streaming environments in a different way, or if the audience is there and you can quantify the audience there, is everything television to you and your teams at the moment?
Somewhere between the two. I think even like 5 or 10 years ago when we first started talking, I remember where we started talking about the TV stack, and you tried to cram like every single media together and say it was all equal and let's plan across it. That was obviously kind of somewhat misleading. And obviously media has different attention, has different other attributes. But we do think context is really important. And we do still try and prioritize. We're not a sort of super premium brand, but we are a brand that wants to have good context. We want to be in like good, rich spaces. And I think that CTV in general is a fair guarantee of that. There are obviously certain streaming service and stuff with more UGC and stuff that perhaps doesn't bring as high a level of quality and context, but it's still really interesting and important to us. So I think we do. It varies a bit, to be honest, market by market. Like the sophistication, we've really dug into it, and I think in some of our bigger markets, UK, France, Germany, and it also depends on the ecosystem around us. We are starting to pick apart the different impact and the different value those channels can have. Otherwise, we start a little bit with hypotheses around it that we need to test and prove. It
must be it's quite difficult, right? Because audiences are increasingly leaning into streaming environments, but there are different types of streaming inventory. There's different ways in which those audiences engage with that content. There's different ways to measure it. There's different ways to activate it, both directly and programmatically. To that point, Tim, when it comes to attribution and quantifying that the campaigns have been delivered in the right environment and there's some type of ROAS or ROI, how do you and your teams at Publicis think about quantifying CTV or TV spend beyond just panel measurement?
Yeah, good. I think the whole debate around, traditionally TV or video being more brand-driven, so, upper funnel awareness driver, and how, the application of data and technology into TV and video is allowing more exploration of that mid and lower funnel activity. So I'll mention a few ways that we do that at PMX Lift in a moment, but I kind of would point out in terms of that upper funnel piece and the brand bit, I think, certainly we don't have all the answers yet within Publicis and PMX Lift, or as an industry, around that piece you mentioned around, consideration around different types of inventory, how that's being measured. But critically, being able to access the right data in order to properly manage frequency
Yep.
and measure DD reach, because of course that upper funnel bit where you're trying to build awareness, being able to manage frequency, properly, effectively across many different suppliers is absolutely critical to that first kind of connection with your consumer.
Yeah.
And then being able to understand, how you build optimal, cost-effective reach points across this, very complex ecosystem is hugely important. So, attribution is great, and the technology enables some of that within CTV. But I think, the industry as a large needs to really continue to work on that. So, I guess like attribution and retail media above and beyond kind of the bit that where we're having a full integration with partners. We partner with various different retail media organisations that will supply that data, match it into our identity universe, and then obviously we can use that to kind of supercharge audience targeting, really build relevance at a category level, and also do some of that closed loop measurement off the back of it.
Yeah.
Mid-funnel stuff, so brand lift, which is relatively commonplace across CTV, but being able to measure the effectiveness of your media buy on lift and how that relates to brand consideration. Spoken a lot about attribution, and then I think the other core one is probably around footfall as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I think there are expanding opportunities. I think it has to be considered about your objective and how you execute that, and really, is this what I'm going to be measuring? Is it relevant to where I've executed the campaign end to end?
Okay, thank you for that. What about immersive formats? We've talked about the data, we've talked about the programmatic activation. I know attribution and measurement is still a difficult topic to really all collectively agree on. But I think from some of the earlier sessions that I've seen today, there's been a lot of great innovation when it comes to the new types of TV ads that can be run, certainly with all of the innovation around AI and generative AI. Two very kind of innovative brands when it comes to running very cool ads. If you look at the history of John Lewis, you look at the history of some of the brands that you represent, Jerry, some pretty creative examples. Are you excited about what you can do now above and beyond the standard kind of 30-second spot that maybe has proven very successful, throughout the last kind of 15, 20 years?
Yes. I don't know if we've cracked it yet. We've started to do some one of the things we're excited about to begin with is sort of how that blurs, yes, creative, but also how it blurs the kind of brand and performance world. So having, you're still something that's kind of similar to your traditional 20, 30-second spot, but also having pauses or lower thirds and things that then give people a chance to kind of follow up with that. We are more a brand marketer, but we do have performance stuff. We have apps, we have delivery in some markets, we have things we want people to sign up to. So it's not necessarily the most bold, creative use of that yet, but it's certainly like, if we're going to do this brand thing, how can we really tie our performance to it? And I think then thinking about how those elements become a bit playful and merge together will be something.
Yeah, great.
I don't know if you...
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree. I think there's some times where we're really trying to drive that emotional, meaningful connection, and that's where that creativity really comes into play, like when we're using CTV advertising to kind of run off the back of our Christmas ad for John Lewis, for example. But equally, there'll be times where maybe, we're not trying to be the most creative. We are just trying to kind of hopefully drive footfall to stores or maybe traffic to app or .com. And I think that's the great thing about this kind of stuff is that you can do things like geo-targeted ads to specifically drive footfall to, let's say, Waitrose Canary Wharf, where we run that kind of brand experiential activity, or you can kind of add shoppable overlays, QR codes, and then help to direct that shopper through to the point of purchase online as well, and really drive that kind of lower funnel piece. So yeah, creativity is definitely going to be key for us, but I think those other elements as well in terms of really precision targeting that lower funnel conversion piece is equally as exciting too.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting what you say there, Jerry, about the potential collapsing of the purchase funnel in television. Historically, TV's been great at delivering upper funnel brand awareness at scale. Yes, performance has existed there. Of course, insurance ads have run very, very successfully in linear TV with the telephone numbers. But Tim, to your point, I'm assuming many of the advertisers you represent ask you for outcomes, performance from their TV campaigns. Do you see a point in time when every CTV campaign is a kind of hybrid of a brand performance kind of buy, or is that just ridiculous? There'll always be upper funnel, always be lower funnel.
Yes, good question. I think, I think, like probably mentioned earlier, I think there is an increase in expectation that as TV and video, acquires more technical capability, then that should be matched and realised in terms of how we measure the value of that investment. But I think it does go. I think Kirsty kind of touched on sequential messaging and when you might use certain creative in certain instances, and when you might use shoppable, for example, but it needs to be a story-led execution, I think, for the consumer. So I don't think it has to be all or nothing. I think it's really about relevance of where you are in that consumer funnel, and how you execute what your objectives are of that campaign.
Yeah, okay. And so, Kirsty, do you think it's going to get easier for Waitrose and kind of John Lewis to activate data-driven TV campaigns in the future because of the innovation that's happening within the holdcos and divisions such as Epsilon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, through the partnership with Epsilon, essentially what they deliver is an end-to-end service. So, they can kind of work with brands to identify that audience. They'll help in terms of all the delivery. So it's very much sort of in their hands more so than the brands for all the technical aspects, which, brands are busy. They have a lot of different channels to activate through. And I think that is kind of what will make it easier. And equally, in terms of that closed-loop measurement piece as well, it's going to make it so much easier for brands to really understand the impact, because ad delivery through channels like CTV environments are so trackable at household and device level. It doesn't really matter if we serve an ad to somebody on Samsung TV and then we follow that up with a retargeting strategy that they view on their desktop, an email or something, for example, for a personalized offer, and then they go and actually make that final purchase in store a week later using their loyalty card. We can then actually attribute that final sell back to that initial ad exposure, which is, it solves the whole host of problems that we previously had in terms of this kind of like closed loop measurement piece.
Okay, and to the kind of DR branding component, how do you think about it from your side of the fence? Do you think there'll always be that element of performance budgets, branding budgets, or hopefully do you see a point in time where you can extract value from one campaign against two types of, funnel metrics?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I don't think, CTV advertising isn't just lower funnel or upper funnel. I think it is a combination of all of it, and I think it does also depend on what the brand is trying to achieve. There might be some times where they're really just trying to hone in on driving performance for a specific promotion that they've got running. That might be quite different to the sort of connection that they want to make with audiences at key times of year like Easter or Christmas. I don't think it's really one or the other. I think you can absolutely do a combination.
Okay, no, and I completely agree with you, by the way. Thank you for that. Jerry, so what excites you then in ad-supported streaming, beyond the great content, beyond the fact now there's never been a better time to be a TV viewer or an advertiser? What would you like to see happen in the CTV ecosystem, and maybe what would you like to carry over from traditional linear but improve to make your job easy as a marketeer?
Yeah, you gloss over the great content bit, but actually that's really important for us. We love the fact that our advertising fuels a positive, good content ecosystem, and I think, not to entirely disparage programmatic advertising, but sometimes where that takes us, made for advertising, content, etc., is a space where, like, at least with CTV, with some of this quality, and obviously you can get really high quality programmatic, but I think for us, we run 4 different brands, and like Burger King in most parts of the world is a big national advertiser, so CTV is kind of incremental or like interesting data approaches on that. We have other brands, Popeyes, Tim Hortons, or we have a Firehouse Subs, which outside the US is really a startup brand. And for those, for us, it's actually how we can get brands that perhaps wouldn't normally think they could be on TV at all to be on TV, because they're certainly not doing national TV. They're probably not doing regional TV, but they can get much more targeted about the audience. They can get more targeted about the day part. They can get more targeted about, weather conditions and things like that. And so we're quite excited about how, as we build a roadmap and a playbook for how we launch a new brand in a new market. Like, we actually have produced a playbook quite recently that has TV as part of that. And when you start talking to franchisees, they're like, whoa, I can't do TV for 5-10 years. Yeah. And we say, well, actually, we have assets, we know it works, and we can. Yeah. So that excites us, which isn't like the super most techie, most geeky end of it, but it's actually a really interesting opportunity for brands like us that have very different life stages and scales.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that you raise. There's been a bunch of press recently about smaller advertisers from the search and the social sector now being able to get their ads onto the biggest screen in the household due to the fact that platforms now exist, Gen AI exists, agencies are building on-ramps. So that's fantastic. Again, to your point, many brands probably thought, there's no way I can get my ad onto television, you know, I've got a small budget, I don't have the assets, I have to go social, I have to go to search. But that's not necessarily the case,
Yeah,
right?
and I think even within, like, I mean, I used to work at like Mondelez and things where you have Cadbury Dairy Milk where you can put a huge budget behind, but you have smaller brands, Green and Blacks and things in that portfolio.
Yeah.
Where again, even in these giant multi-million, billion advertising companies, there are parts of that business which actually you can bring to life in a new way. So that's quite exciting.
I completely agree with you. It's a lot more money, hopefully, transitioning into the connected TV ecosystem. Kirsty, from your side, what would you like to see happen over the next 12 to 24 months to make your life easier as a marketeer?
I mean, we're so early in our journey with all of this, so I think probably ask me again in 6 months and I'll have a lot more to say. We are launching our proposition with Epsilon literally this month. I think, to be honest, just the things that I've mentioned in terms of what's coming that we haven't had before, the closed loop measurement is going to be absolutely massive, particularly for places like Waitrose where the share of trade is much more heavily skewed to stores as well, but now we can actually show how CTV advertising can impact store performance directly as well as online. So yeah, that's going to be really, really big for brands, and I think, exciting things to come really, but I'll probably have an answer for you in a few months.
Tim?
So selfishly from a PMX Lift perspective, I think the two key things that we'd like to see move forward, I think the first is opening up kind of programmatic pipes where they don't currently exist. So kind of mentioned before that certain providers are integrated into our DSP, and that gives us, all of the benefits of that consolidated execution, bidding, measurement, etc. So some partners don't. So it's about building efficiencies around that buy route and how we can best execute the decision and reach the audience. So I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is really around kind of, I guess, like the democratization of data to an extent, which is a difficult subject because, there's lots of different strategies on how organizations will approach that. But I do think that there are ways to, we have the technology in place that will enable the better sharing of data. And it's really important around the focus of how useful that data is for our clients. So I think they're the two things I'll go for.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. We've just been given the sign for time, but one quick last question. If you were to articulate the growing world of CTV in one word at the moment, what would it be? Jerry?
Exciting.
Tim?
I was going to use exciting, so amazing.
I think for us, currently untapped, but won't be in the imminent future once we've launched with this proposition. So very exciting as well.
I love that. Thank you very much for my panelists. Sorry, it's very loud up here. We can't all hear each other, hence the lean-in, but thank you for taking part. Appreciate it.